The opinion pages have a number of pieces on the war with Iran. A new column from National Review contributing editor Andrew McCarthy is titled, "Trump Prepares His Iran Off-Ramp." And in it, Andrew writes in part this: with uphill midterm elections on the horizon, in which the driving issue may be high prices, the time to get congressional support for waging war is before commencing attacks that have foreseeably resulted in surging oil and gas prices. The time to convince political allies that Iran cannot be ceded the power to close the Strait of Hormuz, through which a fifth of the world's oil supply moves, is before they've effectively closed it in response to American attacks. But if the president had tried to make a public case for war, he'd have been forced to think about it and have an answer for it. The president's gut told him this would be quick, in and out. No need to prepare people because it would be over so quickly, there'd be nothing to do but bask in the glow of success. But if that's not in the cards, his impulse is to fold. He's laying the groundwork to pull the plug, declare victory, hope for the best, and move on to the next news cycle. And then this one from columnist Jonah Goldberg, who writes for the Los Angeles Times, a piece headlined, "Republicans Aren't Willing to Call the War in Iran What It Is." He writes, "The main reason congressional Republicans reject the W word is simple. If it's a war, then it's arguably illegal and unconstitutional within the framework of the War Powers Resolution or the Constitution itself, because under the Constitution, declaring war is the sole responsibility of Congress. And the last thing this Congress wants to do is take responsibility for anything. Regardless, Republicans aren't just under a legal clock to get this thing over with, but a political one, too. Polling shows that Americans, including many Republicans, have no thirst for a long conflict, which makes sense, given that they were not asked to prepare for this war at all. Hence, the insistence that this war will be short and tidy. The problem is that Iran knows this, which is why they don't have to win. They just have to ride out the bombings until the public or Trump loses patience with this very real war. And Congressman Scarborough,
yes,
this is now two important conservative...
Never gets old saying that.
It's a good title. You get it.
Thank you, constituent.
Two important conservative voices really casting doubt on not just the goals of this war, but how it ends.
Well, and also, I think most importantly, how it started. You know, latter-day Republicans love to look back and attack Bush 41 for Iraq and Bush 43 for Iraq. There are a lot of short-term memories. If you look at the poll numbers, first of all, George H.W. Bush prepared the world for the first Gulf War. He built and he used, you know, I get so sick and tired of people saying, oh, I want an outsider in Washington. No, we don't want somebody that actually knows what they're doing. We don't say that about our dentists. We don't say that about our brain surgeons. We don't say that about the people who are building the foundation for our houses. So George H.W. Bush had been steeped in diplomacy, had been steeped in politics his entire life. And he put together, before the first Gulf War, the greatest alliance since World War II. And in so doing, he prepared the American people for it. He explained it to the American people. And he ended up having approval ratings in the 90s after the war was over. He lost, though. Why did he lose? He lost because of the economy, something that Republicans have to know. No matter how well this war goes, they're still going to be answering questions about how much gas costs, how much health care costs, how much housing costs, how much groceries cost. Same with George W. Bush. A lot of short-term memories there. He got, how many votes did he get for that war? 65, 70 votes? He had Hillary Clinton. He had, I think he had John Kerry. He had Lieberman. He had a lot of people supporting that war. And there hasn't been the preparation here. And Lindsey Keith, you know, Richard Haas told us earlier this morning, when I was allowed to host for a half hour, I think, he said, you know, the United States was alone in deciding when to start this war. But we don't decide when this war ends. That's the United States, Israel, and Iran. You know, if we cut and run, if we leave, it doesn't mean Iran can't still cause havoc in the Strait of Hormuz. And it doesn't mean that Republicans aren't going to be campaigning with the possibility of gas prices being over $4 a gallon. Talk about affordability concerns as the president goes out today among Republicans. Talk about the distraction with this war with the Republicans. What is the general attitude up on the Hill right now from the Republican caucus toward this war? And how long do you sense they think it can continue without causing them more political damage?
It's a challenging question, Congressman Scarborough, if I might call you that.
Yeah.
You know, but here's one of the things I liken it to as I hear different Republicans speak behind closed doors on the Hill. It's similar to what we saw President Trump do with tariffs. He essentially said, this is a short-term pain for a long-term gain. And you hear him saying similar things to that. And some of the talking points that I've seen that are being passed around are almost exactly the same, that this is a short-term pain with gas prices. We know this is going to go up. We knew this and we planned for it. And don't worry, it's going to get under control soon. The long-term gain for us is ultimately that we're taking somebody off the map who could potentially do harm to the U.S. and its allies in the future. And a lot of Republicans believe that messaging, and they believe if they only have to do it for a short time, that it will be successful. But the concern is to some of the points that you made. If this goes on past that 4 or 6 week time frame, that's when it could get out of control. And seeing how Iran is responding, I wouldn't say that Republicans on the Hill right now are necessarily panicking, but there's definitely a point of concern to see, is this White House really going to keep it to that shorter time frame as Trump had essentially said was going to happen? Right.
And you know, we had the same thing with Iraq. For
right.
those of us who thought a month in, yay, go team, go USA. Iraq's gone great because militarily, the first month we did exceptionally well. This country did exceptionally well, but then it ground down into a quagmire. I don't think we'll see the same thing with President Trump, but there is this feeling, just as Lindsay said, you know, we will take a short-term sacrifice for a long-term gain. For Donald Trump, it's a legacy play to be able to remove a regime that was the epicenter of terrorism since 1979. But there's the rub. Is it going to be contained? Is it going to be a short-term pain for long-term gain? I think that's the biggest question right now hanging over this entire operation.
Well, Congressman, I'm glad you brought that up.
Thank you.
And one of the things that you talked about was these allies, right? That Bush 1 and Bush 2 both worked really hard to put together a group. And what Donald Trump comes into this having really alienated a lot of our closest allies, even like Canada and Mexico. So we are in a different position in the world than we were in those other two wars. But I'm curious, Peter Baker, you know, I'm seeing a lot of anxious polling out of MAGA world. I saw a poll, you know, they are right now, Republicans are meeting, or they just were meeting about the midterms, and Trump spoke to them. And I've seen some poll. I saw a graphic that said, you know, 94% of MAGA Republicans support this war. I don't know what that means exactly. Do you think there's anxiety here? Because he did run on ending foreign wars.
No, he ran on the slogan, no new wars, in fact. In fact, the message he delivered in 2024 was no new wars, fix the economy. And now we're doing the opposite, it looks like, right? We're in a new war, and the economy seems to be very much on the edge. And so, yeah, I think MAGA Republicans are loyal to Trump. You know, it's a personality-based politics as much as it's a policy-based politics, right? They trust in him. They like his toughness. They like his personality, the way he runs things. But they are, I think, uncomfortable with this because it wasn't what they expected when he was going to take office. They were tired of Middle East wars. We've seen this for 25 years. And they're not sure what the goal here is. I'm not sure that the president necessarily understands what the goal here is. I saw a headline yesterday in the Jewish Insider that I thought really captured the messaging challenge here. The headline was, Trump calls war, quote, complete, unquote, but also, quote, just the beginning. Okay, well, that wasn't The Onion. That was actually a genuine headline by journalists trying to make sense of the conflicting messages that we're getting out of this White House. Is it just the beginning, or is it almost complete? And, you know, people are willing to give, a lot of people who support President Trump are willing to give him benefit of the doubt for a while. But as Lindsay said, I think there is an impatience, especially among elected Republicans who are heading into an election season.
Yeah, by the way, The Onion on fire. They are full stride right now, man. On
Some headlines we can't get into right now.
No, we
your own
won't.
research.
But we need to separate these polls that talk about the Republicans or the MAGA Republicans. There's also the new voters that Donald Trump, unlike any other Republican candidate, probably since Reagan, was able to pull in. And who did those new voters listen to? Joe Rogan, Andrew Schultz, Tucker Carlson. They listen to these people who were all against this war, who were all against what happened, or at least the first two against what happened in Minneapolis, and are just asking why. And so, again, the question in swing elections is not always, are you going to be able to get your base out, but are you going to get your base plus out? And that's something Donald Trump has done remarkably well in 16 and 24. Didn't do it as well in 20, but in 16 and 24, and those are the people, I believe, offended by this war that may not show up in a lot of these polling. They're not going to go out and vote for a Democrat, but they're not going to go out and vote for a Republican either right now.
They're going to stay home. And Trump had already, polls suggested even before this war, he'd already started to hemorrhage some of the support of those new voters, black voters, Latino voters, independents, and certainly...
I mean, the independent numbers are just heinous.
Abysmal right now, and this will seemingly not help. All right, everybody stay with us. Coming up next on Morning Joe, oil prices continue to experience high volatility, driven by the widening conflict in the Middle East. Plus, the latest set of inflation data was released just a few moments ago. CNBC's Andrew Ross Sorkin will join us next with how investors are reacting ahead of this morning's opening bell.
What just seems so insane based on what he ran on.